Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the quiet, flickering glow of a medieval scriptorium where the air smells like vellum, iron gall ink, and the faintest hint of candle wax that's been burning a little too long. You're not just observing, you're here, an apprentice with a stiff back and a growing suspicion that this job involves less artistry and more grinding things into dust. The master illuminator squints at you from across the room, and you realize with a sinking feeling that you've just been assigned to prepare enough ultramarine blue pigment to last the winter. That means crushing lapis lazuli for weeks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love imagining all of you drifting off in different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The scriptorium isn't what you'd call bright. Windows are small glass, is expensive, so most of your light comes from candles or, if you're lucky, a carefully angled oil lamp. The room is just warm enough to keep your fingers from stiffening, but cold enough that you're constantly resisting the urge to huddle over your work like a miser guarding gold. And, speaking of gold, you won't be touching any of that today, or this month, maybe ever. Your first task is simple: grind. The lapis lazuli arrives as rough chunks, imported all the way from Afghanistan. Yes, really medieval globalization was wild. Your job is to pulverize it into a fine powder, then mix it with gum arabic to make paint. It's tedious, risk-taking labor, and if you rush, you'll waste precious stone. The master has a sixth sense for wasted materials, and a wooden ruler he's not afraid to use. Historians still argue whether medieval illuminators actually went blind from this work, or if that's just romantic exaggeration. But after your third hour of squinting at blue dust, you're starting to believe it. Here's a fun fact. That stunning blue you're making, it's more expensive than gold, like way more expensive. The church and nobility paid absurd sums for it because nothing else screamed divine, quite like lapis lazuli. And yet, here you are, a lowly apprentice, inhaling its powdered form like it's just another Tuesday. The master calls you over with a grunt, and you wipe your blue-stained hands on your tunic, which is already more pigment than fabric at this point. He slides a wooden bowl across the table filled with a murky liquid that smells vaguely like vinegar and metal. "For the green," he says, as if that explains everything. Turns out, making medieval paint is less delicate artistry and more questionable kitchen experiment. The bowl contains verdigrisa, vibrant green pigment made by hanging copper plates over vinegar for weeks until they grow a crusty blue-green patina. You scrape it off, grind it, and pray it doesn't poison you, which, by the way, it totally could. Your fingers are now permanently multicolored blue from the lapis, green from the copper, and a suspicious yellow from something no one will properly explain to you. The other apprentices joke that you're turning into a living manuscript. Historians still argue whether illuminators actually suffered long-term effects from handling toxic pigments daily. Some accounts mention chronic headaches, tremors, or worse, but hey, at least the colors were pretty. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some illuminators swore by eating raw garlic to ward off the fume. The master finally lets you touch actual parchment today, and you immediately regret wishing for this moment. The calfskin is stiff under your fingers, its surface slightly tacky from the alum used to treat it. One wrong move, and your quill will snag, ruining hours of work. No pressure. You're copying a psalter slowly, painstakingly, while the master breathes down your neck. Every letter must match the exemplar exactly. No flourishes, no personality. Just perfect, identical script. It's like medieval handwriting boot camp, except instead of push-ups, you get knuckle raps from a wooden stylus when you mess up. The quirky detail. Some manuscripts contain secret complaints scribbled in the margins by bored monks. One famously reads, "Oh, my hand," in shaky letters, followed by a doodle of what might be a crying face. Relatable. Historians still argue whether the Church's strict copyist rules stifled creativity or actually preserved texts more accurately. The bell rings for sext, and you nearly weep with relief as your numb fingers finally unclench from the quill. Lunch in the monastery isn't much coarse bread, weak beer, and a dubious pottage that may or may not contain turnips, but right now it tastes like heaven. The other apprentices exchange knowing glances as you massage your aching wrist. One slides you a tiny clay pot of salve that smells like rosemary and sheep fat. "Rub it on before compline," he mutters, "or you won't sleep." Back in the scriptorium, the afternoon light slants through the high windows, just enough to reveal the dust motes dancing above your desk. The master assigns you to rubrication today, adding those bright red initials that make manuscripts pop. It's simple work. Vermilion pigment mixed with egg white, applied with the tiniest of brushes. But your hand still shakes from this morning's copying marathon, and your first attempt looks more like a bloody thumbprint than a sacred D. Here's a fact you're too tired to appreciate. That vibrant red comes from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide compound. Yes, mercury, the same stuff that drives hatters mad. No one mentions this as you grind the crimson rocks into powder, of course. The master just nods approvingly when you sneeze a pink cloud. Historians still argue whether rubricators suffered more from mercury poisoning or sheer boredom. As you paint your 15th identical initial, watching the red seep into the part, a commotion at the scriptorium door makes everyone look up from their work. A traveling merchant has arrived with a package wrapped in oiled cloth, and the way the master's eyes light up tells you this isn't just another shipment of parchment. When he unwraps it, you see the reason for the excitement. A small block of pure gold, gleaming dully in the candlelight. Gilding day. The senior apprentice whispers to you with a mix of reverence and dread. The master demonstrates the process with the care of a surgeon. First, he hammers the gold into a sheet, so thin you can see the candle flame through it. Then comes the tricky part, applying the bowl, a reddish clay mixture, to the page in the exact shape of the design. You hold your breath as he breathes lightly on the sticky surface, just enough moisture before laying down the gold leaf with a squirrel hair brush. One wrong exhale, and the fortune in gold will wrinkle or tear. Your turn comes, and your hands shake so badly the master makes you sit on them until they stop. The first time you try, the gold sticks to your fingers instead of the page. The second time, you sneeze at the worst possible moment. By your third attempt, the master is considering whether apprentice stew might be a viable alternative to continuing your training. Here's a fact that keeps you up at night. That tiny gold leaf you just ruined? Worth more than your family's farm. Maybe more than your family. Historians still argue whether medieval gilders actually held their breath during this process, or if that's just artistic. The scriptorium falls into an eerie silence as the master leaves to attend none prayers, leaving you alone with the senior apprentices. One of Thema, lanky redhead with ink-stained teeth slides a partially completed psalter toward you. Marginalia time. He whispers with a grin that suggests this is either a sacred rite or grounds for immediate excommunication. At first, you think it's a test. Then you see the other apprentices pulling out their secret brushes, the ones they hide when the master is present. The margins of the manuscript slowly come alive with bizarre creations, a snail with a knight's helmet, a monkey playing the lute, a rabbit serving another rabbit what appears to be a subpoena. Your contribution? A particularly grumpy-looking dragon trying and failing to blow out a candle. It's terrible. It's wonderful. It's probably heretical. The quirky detail? Some scholars believe these doodles were medieval stress relief, while others insist they held hidden meanings. Your personal theory? Monks just really like drawing animals in silly situations. Historians still argue whether these marginalia were tolerated, or simply went unnoticed by the monastery bells ring for matins, jolting you awake in your cramped cell. It's still pitch black outside some ungodly hour when even the owls are asleep but the scriptorium waits for no one. You fumble with your robe by candlelight, nearly setting your sleeve on fire twice before making it to the icy courtyard. The other apprentices move like ghosts through the pre-dawn dark, their breath forming little clouds in the air. Today's special torture? Line ruling. Before a single word can be written, every page must be prepared with dozens of perfectly straight, evenly spaced guidelines. You're handed a lead plummet and a straight edge, and suddenly geometry feels less like a scholarly pursuit and more like a personal vendetta. The first few pages go well enough, but by the 10th, your lines start developing worrying curves. Here's a fact that would be fascinating if you weren't half asleep. Some manuscripts show evidence of pricking tiny holes made along the edges of pages to guide the ruling process. You're making those holes now, squinting in the candlelight, trying not to stab yourself. Historians still argue whether scribes worked through the night, or if that's just a romantic myth. As you watch the sky slowly lighten, a commotion erupts when the abbot himself sweeps into the scriptorium, his robes whispering across the flagstones. He's brought visitors a wealthy nobleman and his retinue who've come to commission a new book of hours. The nobleman's fingers, adorned with heavy rings, tap impatiently against his belt as the master presents samples of their work. You try to look busy and pious, though you're mostly just trying not to sneeze from the cloud of perfume surrounding the noble party. The nobleman's wife, swathed in enough silk to bankrupt a small village, peers over your shoulder as you work. Her breath smells of spiced wine as she points to an illumination you've been laboring over for weeks. "Couldn't the blue be bluer?" she asks, as if you've simply been holding out on her. Here's the kicker. She wants it finished by Christmas. It's currently August. The master accepts the commission with a serene smile, but you notice his knuckles go white around his stylus. Historians still argue whether these lavish commissions were acts of devotion or just medieval flexing. Winter arrives with a vengeance, turning the scriptorium into a peculiar kind of purgatory. Your fingers are so stiff with cold that dipping your quill feels like stabbing frozen butter. The ink keeps thickening into sludge no matter how close you hold it to the brazier. And just when you think things can't get worse, the master assigns you to work with silver leaf, which behaves like gold's evil, more temperamental cousin. The silver tarnishes if you so much as look at it wrong. Every time you exhale near the page, another section turns black. By the end of the day, your carefully applied illuminations look like they've been through a small fire. The master sighs and sends you to prepare more ink instead punishment that at least lets you hover near the brazier. Here's a fact that would be comforting if you weren't freezing. Medieval scribes sometimes added alcohol to their ink in winter to keep it from freezing. You eye the monastery's communion wine with new interest. Historians still argue whether silver tarnish was seen as a flaw or an intentional. Spring brings unexpected chaos when a traveling scholar arrives with a chest full of exotic pigments from the east. The scriptorium erupts in excitement over colors no one's seen before: vibrant saffron yellows, deep lacquer reds, and a green so bright it makes your eyes water. The master handles each pigment like sacred relics, which, given their cost, they might as well be. Your job? Test each new color on scrap parchment while the scholar shares wild tales of caravans, braving bandits, and sandstorms to deliver these treasures. One story involves a camel eating an entire shipment of indigo, resulting in the most expensive dung in history. You're not entirely sure you believe him, but the twinkle in his eye suggests this might be the medieval equivalent of trolling apprentices. Here's the catch. These new pigments require entirely different binding techniques. The saffron won't stick without honey, the lacquer bleeds if you add too much egg white, and the green might actually be poisonous. The master makes you label each sample with meticulous notes, which is how you find yourself writing "Do not lick" next to your latest creation. Historians still argue whether medieval illuminators understood the toxicity of their materials. The summer heat turns the scriptorium into a slow-cooking hell. Your vellum warps, your ink dries too fast, and the smell of melting wax mixes unpleasantly with the ever-present tang of iron gall. The master, in a rare moment of mercy, declares an afternoon breaknought out of kindness, but because he caught an apprentice fainting onto a freshly gilded page last week. You escape to the cloister garden, where the other apprentices are comparing sunburns and trading remedies for ink-stained fingers. Someone produces a stolen honey cake, and for a few glorious minutes, you're not an illuminator, just a bunch of sweaty teenagers complaining about work. That's when you notice Sister Marguerite watching from the herb garden, her own hands stained green from grinding malachite. Here's something they don't teach you. The convent across town produces some of the finest illuminations in the region, though you'd never know it from their unsigned work. Sister Marguerite's sketches put your best efforts to shame, but when you compliment her, she just smiles and says, "Adequate work honors God." Historians still argue whether female illuminators were truly anonymous, or if we've simply failed to look for their signatures. As Sister Marguerite disappears back into the shadows of the cloister, leaving behind a single, perfect sketch of a honeybee, you're struck by how many masters might have been mistresses all. Autumn arrives with a flurry of activity. The scriptorium is preparing manuscripts for the Christmas market, and suddenly, your once plodding pace becomes a frantic race against time. The master has you working in shifts now, with candlelight stretching long into the night. Your eyes burn from squinting, your back aches from hunching, and your fingers have developed a permanent tremor that makes delicate work nearly impossible. The nobleman's book of hours is finally taking shape, its pages glittering with gold and vibrant pigments. You're assigned the calendar pages painting tiny agricultural scenes for each month. January features a lord feasting by a fire while peasants shovel snow outside. August shows laborers harvesting wheat under a punishing sun. It's equal parts beautiful and brutally honest about medieval life. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Those idyllic scenes are based on real people who will never own such a book. The peasant who modeled for your harvest scene probably earns in a year what this single page costs. The master catches you staring at your work a beat too long, and gruffly reminds you that art serves truth, but pays best when it flatters. Historians still argue whether illuminators inserted subtle social commentary in these scenes. As you add a crisis strikes when the master falls ill not the usual complaints about his back or eyes, but a proper fever that has the monastery's infirmarian shaking his head. The scriptorium doesn't stop, of course. If anything, the pace quickens as the senior apprentices jockey for position, each hoping to impress enough to be named successor. You're assigned to help Brother Thomas, the oldest illuminator, whose hands shake so badly he can no longer paint straight lines, but whose knowledge of pigments is unmatched. His cell smells of crushed herbs and old parchment, and he speaks in riddles that might be wisdom or might just be fever dreams. The blue remembers the sky, he tells you as you grind lapis, and the gold never forgets the sun. Here's something unexpected. Without the master's watchful eye, the work becomes enjoyable. Brother Thomas encourages you to add small personal tacheza-bird in the margin here, an extra flourish there. Your hands still cramps, your eyes still strain, but for the first time, it feels like creation rather than drudgery. Historians still argue whether medieval scriptoriums encouraged individual style or demanded strict conformity. As you sneak a tiny self-portrait into the corner of a capital, the master returns, just as winter tightens its grip, his cough lingering but his ruler as swift as ever. He surveys the work done in his absence with a critical eye, pausing longest at your pages. Your stomach drops until he grunts what might be approval and moves on. The senior apprentices look crestfallen. You try not to look too pleased. Now comes the final push. The nobleman's book must be bound before the Christmas feast, which means endless hours of checking, correcting, and touching up. You discover that gold leaf applied months ago has started to flake at the edges. The vermilion initials have bled slightly into the parchment. Every flaw seems catastrophic until the master shows you how to fix them with tiny, nearly invisible strokes. Here's the secret. No one tells apprentices. Perfection isn't about never making mistakes. It's about knowing how to hide them so well even God might miss them. The master demonstrates, turning your botched saint's face into a minor miracle with 3 flicks of his tiniest brush. Historians still argue whether medieval artists intentionally left small flaws as humbles to God. As you watch the master correct the finished Book of Hours glows on the scriptorium's presentation table, its covers heavy with carved ivory and precious metals. All those months of grinding, painting, and squinting have transformed into this single object more valuable than everything you've ever touched in your life combined. The nobleman's messenger inspects it with barely concealed greed, his fingers lingering on the gilded edges. As the book disappears into its protective case, something unexpected happens. The master presses a small folded parchment into your hand, your official letter of completion. You're no longer an apprentice. The other Illuminators clap your back, even the senior ones who wanted the position for themselves. Brother Thomas gives you his favorite brush, its handle worn smooth from decades of use. Here's what they don't prepare you for: the emptiness after. The scriptorium continues its work, but your hands feel strangely light without their usual tools. You catch yourself staring at the master's empty stool more often than you'd like to admit. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen felt pride in their anonymous work. As you run your fingers over the faint ridge of a painted vine you know is yours, hidden among hundreds of others in the monastery's newest psalter, the answer seems obvious.